Good morning. It is very disappointing after having such a great start to the season and how great it is to have football back that we are here this morning talking about an incident that occurred last night. It is absolutely abhorrent that we have a situation where we have players subjected to any form of vilification or abuse, whether that be racial abuse or any form of vilification. It's completely unacceptable. What I am pleased about, though, is the way the game always rallies behind anyone in the game that is affected by this. And I want to commend, in this particular example, Latrell Mitchell for his leadership, for calling out this action. But not just Latrell, all of the players last night from both teams who worked together to assist the stadium, the NRL officials, the police and everyone in getting all the facts and making sure that these types of situations don't happen in the future. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And again, I want to commend Latrell and all the players who speak up and take action. And I want to encourage everyone in our game to do exactly the same thing. It is the only way we're going to eradicate these types of unfortunate incidences from our game. I also want to support the players. They do a great job for us. And it's not just the players, it's all participants, all officials in the game, all volunteers and all fans. Everybody deserves to be respected and everyone deserves to be made and feel comfortable in our game. It's one of the things we love about rugby league, the genuine inclusivity that exists. And when issues like this happen, just know that we'll deal with them and we'll deal with them thoroughly. We're cooperating with the police, we'll get to the bottom of the facts and we'll make sure that the appropriate action and appropriate process follows once we have all the details.
Andrew, can you tell us, sorry, finish your statement.
Yep.
Can you tell us what you know about what happened and how you plan to investigate?
I'm not going to give a running commentary around the facts of the situation because there is a process underway. But clearly there has been an unfortunate incident where a fan has made a remark to a player and that has been identified by other players too. And we are now getting to the bottom of exactly what was said by whom and what action we will take.
There's been reports that the alleged incident came from a child. How does that change the situation?
Well, I think every situation needs to be dealt with based on the facts, and that's what I was referring to earlier. There are certain things in our game that are just purely unacceptable, and once we know all of the facts around what was said and by whom, we will think very carefully about what the appropriate action is for that. This is also an opportunity for us to educate people too. So whilst we might take strong action, we also want to use this as an opportunity to educate people that require it around what is acceptable, not only at rugby league games, but in our society more generally.
Is a life ban still a potential punishment?
I'm not going to jump to what the potential action or sanction is because it's very much based on the circumstances and the facts. It's been less than 24 hours and we need to let the integrity unit and the authorities do their job and get all the information.
Andrew, are you confident that whatever ban the NRL, whatever sanction the NRL imposes, it does include a ban, it can be enforced? Like what bans, what do you find hard to
So
enforce?
we've taken strong action in the past, Scott, and I think we have a track record of making sure that we deal with these matters appropriately. Sometimes matters are very delicate, and so we need to think innovatively around what we do to make sure that we actually genuinely are making a difference. So sanction is part of it, but also rehabilitation and better understanding is also part of that too. But we haven't hesitated in the past where we have information to act on it and to enforce bans on fans, on participants, on those inside the game. You can't take for granted that being part of rugby league means you have to adhere to certain standards and beliefs.
Has this ban been identified, do you know? Or are you still looking for this person involved or asking them to make them?
Yeah, so that's a matter that the police and our integrity team are working through to get all the information and everyone that was involved. So I'm not aware of any of those details just yet.
Have you personally been in touch with Latrell? Do you have an update on this last night?
Yes, I haven't spoken to Latrell directly. I've reached out to him and we've exchanged texts. He knows that he has my support and he's acknowledged that. I've spoken to the club CEO, Blake Solly. I commend the way in which both South Sydney and the Penrith Panthers have dealt with the situation. As I said earlier, it's commendable and in fact something to be really proud of around how the game rallies together in these types of situations. But let's be honest, these types of things hurt. Latrell is a human being and comments like this affect us whether or not we want to admit that. But he knows that the game stands behind him and I think he's gaining a lot of strength from the support that he has from everyone inside the game.
His teammates, though, are still concerned that he may leave at the end of his current contract. That means he could be forced to retirement by the age of 30. Would that be a disappointment that he would be driven effectively out of the game by racism if that is to happen?
Yeah, if that is to happen, then that will be incredibly disappointing. I think that that's a long way away. Latrell's an incredible player, but he's also a leader in his community. He does unbelievable work off the field for the community. He's passionate about helping young people develop. He plays such an important role off the field for the game. The All-Stars week is an incredible special week where the players get to spend time together and also with the community. It's just one example of where Latrell's leadership really makes a difference, well beyond just the South Sydney Rabbitohs, where he's obviously a leader as well. And he knows that he's supported by the game, and he knows he's got an opportunity to make a difference and be a role model for the game. That's a heavy burden, and we'll continue to support him, but I'm confident that he'll continue to be a hero for not just South Sydney Rabbitohs fans, but for broader fans in the game.
Andrew, 10 years ago, Adam Goods was racially abused by a child at the Aussie Rules game. What does it say about Australian society and Australian sport that a similar event has happened 10 years later?
Yeah, it's difficult to make generalisations. I also don't want to make any comparisons against other sports. Look, I grew up in a country that was divided through racial laws. It was abhorrent. I grew up when I was very young, when apartheid still existed, and I got to see the pain that inflicted. And as someone that was at right in the middle of that, I completely understand just how much these types of statements hurt. But then I got to see how South Africa transformed under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. And the reason I'm using that analogy is when I came to Australia, I was overwhelmed by how inclusive Australian society actually is in comparison to and context to where I came from. And whilst there are always going to be outliers, there are always going to be individuals in society that are at the extreme. And we'll do everything that we can to educate them and to change the way they behave and the things that they say. I'm incredibly proud to live in Australia, and I'm incredibly proud to be part of rugby league because, as far as I'm concerned, the absolute vast majority of our society, and certainly our sport, is completely inclusive and respectful of our differences.
If there are to be sanctions, is that the responsibility of the NRL, the club, the stadium? Who has the responsibility?
It depends on the individual circumstances, but obviously the jurisdiction for our game sits under the NRL. So if we were going to implement hypothetically a restriction on who can attend our games, we're able to do that. But that's a matter for us to consider once we know the facts.
Will you be looking at more general, broad sanctions to rule out any kind of racial vilification, actually have a penalty in place?
Well, we have in the past. As I mentioned earlier, there's not a blanket rule you can apply to these types of situations. They're complicated. And so we look at them, we look at the facts, we look at what evidence we've got, and then we'll act on it. And in the past, we've taken really strong action. We'll continue to do that where necessary.
So I guess I'm asking why not have a blanket rule?
Excuse me?
I guess I'm asking why not have a blanket rule in the case of racial vilification?
Well, I think for the simple reason that, like, on-field penalties apply to players, off-field penalties apply to players, the law, each of these matters are dealt with based on the unique circumstances. So you might have some parameters for that, and we've indicated in the past what our appetite is on this, but I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all.
Is there a time frame on the investigation concluding and coming to any sort of sanction?
Well, I can say this, it's a high priority, number one. Number two, we need to have all the information. So we'll take as long as we need to get to all the information we need, but it is a high priority.
Andrew, you mentioned All-Stars. The game has Indigenous round. It's been a leader in this space in the past, and it's comforted that you know, it's so inclusive. But can the game be doing more to educate fans so that this doesn't happen again? Because you said you wanted to eradicate.
Yeah.
Can we eradicate it from the game?
We've come such a long way as a game, and in my view, we can be really proud of where we're at, but we can always do more. And we'll be learning from these situations, and hopefully we're talking about them less and less, and eventually they become redundant and we eradicate it completely. And all we're talking about is celebrating the good part of our game. But whilst these incidences are occurring, one is one too many, and yes, there's more that we can do clearly because we're still talking about it today and we shouldn't be.
Andrew, are you concerned that the way that Latrell has somehow become a target, it's like an undercurrent target, and it's a number of times now he's been abused online and in person? And also, will the game do anything around having more protection around him at games or half-time and whatnot?
Yeah, and again, we've reached out to Latrell. The club do a fantastic job of making sure that he feels supported, and the game will do the exact same thing. And if there is more support required, absolutely, we'll do that. Latrell's a fantastic player, and our game will continue to have passionate fans who will make their views clear, whether they're cheering or whether they're booing. But when people step over the line and bring other things into it, in this particular case, racial vilification, that line cannot be crossed, and we will deal with it. So if we need to provide more support for the players in that regard, then we will. I want to make the point, though, we are very active in this space. We have a great relationship with the players in this regard. Our integrity unit is proactive and reactive to responding to things, whether they be online or whether they be perhaps even behind the scenes. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, but clearly, to the point raised earlier, there's more that we can do, and we're open to what those opportunities might be.
Do you know if Latrell has expressed any desire to have that fan punished or charged by police, perhaps? Is he?
Look, the team's obviously in contact with him, and he'll be a key stakeholder in terms of gathering what occurred and what we are going to do, but I'm not in a position to express those views now. That'll come out through the course of the investigation.
Last couple, thanks, Scott.
Andrew, there's been examples in European Football Week, teams have refused to go back for a second half in a similar incident where players have been racially vilified. How damaging would that be to the game if it ever got to that point? Where it's like South Sydney last night have gone, you know what, stuff that.
Yeah, I don't think we're at that point. Like, I think we're talking about here isolated incidences. We need to deal with those incidences. I don't think we're at that point where we have a systemic problem in our game. And as I said earlier, I'm actually I'm very proud to be standing here talking about how the game comes together when these situations occur. And I think the message to those outlying individuals is very clear. You're not welcome in our game. And you're going to be called out. And you're going to be called out not just by players, but by fans, by officials. And we self-regulate in our game. And eventually it becomes eradicated. So I don't think we're anywhere near that point. I'm actually incredibly proud of the way in which the game rallies together when these types of situations occur.
And do you think it can be eradicated? Because this has happened over 30 years, not like every week or anything, but it has happened over years.
Well, that's got to be our goal. It's got to be our vision to do that. It's got to be our vision to say we don't want to be talking about this, so that when my kids or their kids are talking about sport, it's only positive. But as I said, we've got some ways to go, and we will do all that we can to make sure that we leave the game better than we found it, and that means these types of incidences are not occurring.
What's the role of the rugby league versus, say, schools and versus parents in terms of the education?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. I mean, you're absolutely on the money with the question, because there's a role around self-regulation and what's acceptable from a leadership perspective, but then there's a role that teachers, parents, and role models in for example, in sport, coaches, but even senior leaders within the game around what's acceptable. And so I think all of that needs to change in order for us to have a situation where we're not talking about these types of events.
Are you surprised that this happened?
I mean, it's not pleasant, and certainly not something that I was hoping that we'll be talking about on a Friday after watching another magnificent rugby league game. And I'm surprised because we don't see these incidences too often, but we are going to deal with it, and we're going to take it seriously, and we're going to see what learnings we get from it.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys.